All right, colleagues, let's begin. In fact, Alexandra Yurievna will have to renegotiate the traffic jam. She will join us. I'm welcoming President's Academy at the Gaidar Forum, the session that we carry out together. I'll introduce my colleague and co-moderator, Andrei Galiev, Vice President of the Corporation of the Russian Textbook Corporation. This session slightly has provocative nature, judging by the title, Why Does the State Need School and Why School Needs State? Andrei, introductory speech. Please make it. And next, distinguished speakers, I will not introduce all of them. We have agenda, and not to waste time. Anytime I will give the floor, we'll introduce the speaker. Colleagues, welcome. We gathered here at Gaidar Forum. This is a very good venue for this type of conversation because Gaidar Forum is always featuring expert view and the conceptuality. Thank you very much indeed to RANEPA for the fact that 10 years it hosts the forum, and also for the fact that this year educational problematics is made a paramount importance. RANEPA is the state service. State service has practical nature. That's why I'd like to challenge all participants of today's discussion to disclose and turn around and make it more practical. So this is all bullet points I wanted to express. In my understanding, Maxim already said that the session has slightly provocative nature. It was made intentionally. For instance, why does the state need school? Seemingly, question is quite obvious, but if you start thinking like this, it will be discovered that variants are many of answers. So the officials can report realization of the president's orders and entrance into the top 10, global top 10 in terms of quality of education. Why does the school need state? First idea is money and also issuance of the state diplomas. Is it exhaustive? Is this answer exhaustive? It covers all problematics? Of course not. And now during this session we'll try to find some possible synthetic, slightly different answers to this question. I challenge all people assembled here. First we have questions. On the other hand, you don't need to hold on to them. I'd like to make discussion very free. What's on your mind, you can express. In order to set the tone, I'd like to see the moderation slide of the presentation. This is my personal expert rating of the key problems that describe, for me, the problematic area, scary problems and complexity of solutions. Sometimes we get a feeling that common school seems that most of the stakeholders of educational process is very complex subject of application of power. There are many different problems. There are many different vectors that merge in the common school. So to approach the subject is quite difficult. In order to solve difficult problems, we're not so positive about complex solutions. So complexity, for me, is the only one problem. Erhard syndrome, I call that is being ascribed to Ludwig Erhard, the author of the German power miracle after the war. The key problem of the state happens when everyone thinks about himself and nobody thinks about common cause. It has to do with the disparity of different state actors that must regulate educational process, and also oftentimes quite strange solutions made, the solutions that objectively lead to monopolization of number of the private markets that are related to the general education. And the third problem is absence of the trust between stakeholders of educational sphere. Actually speaking, the first third of the problems are connected. I'll repeat. This is my expert personal rating. That is why you can regard it, you can disregard it, colleagues. Maybe have some personal rating of the problems of the general education. This is all. I finish here and try not to take your time. And actually, I suggest to begin from the question that in some way was posed as number one: what does the state gain through schools activity and what is supposed to gain? Alexandra is still absent. I'd like to give the floor to her. Marina Nikolaevna, maybe you can begin this discussion as the person that in greater terms is on this side of the state. The first speaker was selected according to the gender principle. Notice I didn't say it. I think that the question, why does school needs state, is philosophical. Second, you asked about practical issues. And considering the time mode, execution of the Decree 204 and the national projects and programs of digital economy, we need to talk about change. In the sense, the state from the national project, I have a feeling, expects some phase transition. Now we are in certain plane and we need to make a leap upwards and try to hold the height. In this sense, perhaps there is special meaning in definition of the elements that must be transformed in experience phase transition. For myself, I see 4 key elements that in current state are in one form and transition to what we need to carry out. So maybe it's reasonable to specify it at the beginning of discussion. I hope that I'll be given the floor. I like to draw a resume line. So 4 elements. First element, till now, starting from development of mass education in our country, the customer of education is the state. As the consequence of this fact, we have singularity of educational trajectory of development for all students. Next, we have traditionally built monopoly for educational logistics that at present time is limited by 4 walls of a school. And the fourth element is usurping of distribution of knowledge, skills, and competences, although previous system was specified as the one knowing paradigm, such as the parents and textbooks. What did we come to? We have technical corridor, and we need to carry out this leap and come to corresponding in the polar elements of these 4 elements of educational ecosystem, because we need to go from leave regulated and properly regulated system. So there is meaning of this state. I think that the other speakers will tell us about this. What do we come to? To make sure that in the center of educational system is a child. It was never before. The child doesn't want to be stuffed with the set of knowledge that within last 100 years, the leap of the volume of the civilization knowledge is so huge that child cannot contain so much knowledge. We need to teach how to learn and synthesize and be able to adapt to the complexity and confusion type situation. The postulate that the customer of education must comply with the needs of the state. It's not exclusively state. Next, he has to receive this knowledge not at school, but receive within the framework of the network system, where knowledge distribution is in the walls of the entire education institution, college, externality, that keeps playing more important role. Also, the additional education. Who is the translator? We need to change the role of the teacher. He has to navigate the process of teaching and manage the process, not to manage the knowledge and the content that the child gains. We understand that monopolization of the source of knowledge is changing even now, and every one of us has access to all databases, access to all the informational data, informational bases that civilization accumulated. There is limitation in terms of the single trajectory. It is necessary to switch from to individualization of education. It is clear there are some restrictions because within system of mass education certainly will have invariant component, but we must understand that with increase of level and age of student, variative component must grow. Roughly speaking, these are four postulates. Switching to child is skills and abilities, network, not one school, and the source of information must be huge. At the same time, I will make reservation when we talk about practice-oriented education. Earlier we had, if we imagine system in the Cartesian coordinate system and the ordinate axis, we have current system. We have certain volume of knowledge determined by the basic curriculum, and axis is the socialization, because school is socialization factor. We have to come to the point when socialization is normal, and not only for children with special needs, because our state is working on gifted children and children that have specifics in consumption of knowledge. 85% really socialization we don't do. The ordinate axis have to switch from the knowledge paradigm to paradigm of self-development. Self-development must become a value, so every person starting from school years has to understand that he sets the goal, he is trying to achieve it, but the depth and width can be different, and this is the individualization. Thank you. As for resume, as the result of realization of national project, the state stops being customer. For the school, this is a postulate. Is this correct? I simply make a short resume because this is really important. Then it slightly changes the questions that were offered for discussion, and then there comes the role of the state in relation to school. Naturally, a resume, the state stops being customer, period. This is our future. For simplicity reasons, if the state withdrew, if it stops being customer, nothing wrong, it should give subsidies. But we have to determine how to give it based on the state order or municipal order. I suppose that formula, the state stops being customer, is very attractive. Let's imagine for a second that there is no state order. That means there is no federal state educational standards, right? There are no curricula. What will happen? In fact, nothing will happen. You understand? Nothing wrong or nothing good, nothing bad. Let's talk about bad. Certainly, I remember when the federal statute in '83, when school was relieved from the budget financing, and the letters from school said, why did you give us freedom? We need instruction. We don't need freedom. I suppose that at some period of time will happen the same. They will require, give us formula, give us order, otherwise we don't know what to do. It's quite interesting detail. If there is no standards, doesn't happen the process that Marina Nikolaevna was talking about. Alongside with the school, there's mysterious, although for the majority of people present here, not mysterious process of a new education. Every December, my school graduate 259, 15 people, there's version, will not pass the aptitude test. And I'm saying, give me this group 2 weeks before New Year, I'll talk to them. They come to me, and I talk to them one-on-one, vis-a-vis. I'm asking, what's about literature? You don't do it. He says, I have no time. He performs to a research center of Steklov, trying to resolve the problem. As for the rest, he doesn't have time. Together with Marina Nikolaevna, we can inspected the program, the curriculum, and I discovered that there's no money for another project financing teaching gifted children. There is a limit of so-called gifted. These are successful children. This is usually 10 or 12% of Olympic children in very good school, and the other 90%, the oil in Kuwait, the cost than Salicart oil. Maybe we need to work on enrichment, for cynic approach. By the way, I offer to the minister, let's make center to work for working with gifted F students. F students can be employers for the A students of school, the graduates. Because of this, it seems to me that it is extremely important that the state order continues. Without it, subsidy is not possible. As a school principal, I have a dream. Give me subsidy, don't touch me. And evaluate according to results. So freedom against results. It was national initiative of our new school in 2008, by the way. It is being practiced in Moscow quite widely. There is one thing, 5 days or 6 days. Modern school of Russia resembles grandma two-bedroom apartment. I had grandmother. I asked her to have a rope. This is a rope in the storage room. This is our modern school. I'm not saying that we need Scandinavian minimalism today, but it's high time to get rid of very many things that have inertial and customary nature. I suggest a small detail, don't want to take too much time, so let's think about the portion of the population of school. How many school children do we have? 15 million? 15 million. So 12 million don't win Olympiads, don't get to the High School of Economics contracted program. Those who are needed by our employers, very much needed. The employer waits when somebody comes to him, and then I personally believe, will not be ashamed of selection. I believe that synergy effect will take place very quickly. Why quickly? Because Solsum is much more reactive than the state. It makes things faster. Just for a second, if Ministry of Education disappears, Ministry of Enlightenment, will we work? If existing Ministry of Education will work, we work easily. It reminds me, 15 years ago, the case from my life when during the meeting with Fursenko, who was appointed recently in spring by Minister of Education and Science. It's about law and education. You said a phrase that was remembered, and periodically listening to you, I recall this phrase: don't touch law and education. It doesn't prevent us from working fine. Do I understand it correctly? That in this case, in this particular case, the customer, or maybe not customer, don't bother school, just provide the movement that seems to be appropriate. Educational law is very powerful regulator. I don't know any alternative in terms of its sense in any other country. It would be nice not to touch it and declare moratorium on substantial changes within the system. I mean, moratorium from the top. But if we get accustomed to one thing, Yefim Lazarevich, clarification. You said that you have proposals. You're not the only one who has proposals in terms of the school people. You mentioned employers that are acutely interested to have new people coming to them that are quite ready. Also, you can add tertiary institutions that are interested. They don't need to teach children from very beginning. Is there in our country in some form, I'll say differently, do we have in our country effective venue for coordination of interests of different stakeholders of educational process? I believe not. There is no such venue. There was forerunner of such venue in early 2000. Russian Public Council on Development of Education. I see many people here who are members of this council. You mentioned important point, the employers. When families bring children to school, they're concerned with the tertiary institutions, but transformation happened. They're much faster. Consider future labor market, and then they try to touch and feel. And even 5 years ago, the tertiary institution was everything. What's next is unknown. It happens to be inertial perception of the period when they were employed according to distribution system. These are people of 50 years old. And small detail, the Minister of Education of France, she was saying that everyone talks about, like morning prayer, practically oriented education. Look at the seniors. I'm not talking about university students. They ask for job. They can and are able to work not only with big data, but they can do many different things. And current situation, when the number of the people of retirement age, despite all the reform, is growing, we have to think about them. This must be not the venue only for the stakeholders that you specify, but I would include Ministry of Labor and so on and so forth. Alexander, thank you for coming to us through the traffic jams. I think that Alexandra Yurievna will help you to end the discussion. Look what is happening. Yefim Lazarevich said, he said that venue for this comprehensive discussion doesn't exist. In given situation, how, even more so, we're talking about what he was speaking about mass school. What to do about gifted children, it's more or less clear, starting from non-thesis that the talent can pave the road. Of course, it's not so, but there is some fairness in this. These 12 million children that cannot be considered gifted, but in our economics, they become either freeloaders or they increase labor productivity in this economy. How can what was elaborated in the best schools of the country, how to translate into mass school? And I would like to suggest, Andrei, please mention why did you begin this his story in Skolkovo. Thank you, Andrei. I'll start from disclaimer with some excuse for us. For us, is the topic for the Moscow School of Management in Skolkovo. It's quite new and unusual because we're a management school, we're a business school. However, we've come to this theme, and I'll say why and what is the essence of this program. We, for quite a long time, accidentally, because we had a team led by Andrei Volkov, who had expertise in organization of educational institutions, of tertiary education. We entered the theme of preparation of the teams of the superior education schools, the tertiary educational schools. In 5 years, since year 13, we prepared 1,000 people. It's about, I'll not say precisely, 70 educational institutions. Among them, among the graduates, there are many newly appointed presidents of the universities, and through the work with the higher education institutions. And in the program 500, we work with 21 universities that participate in the program 5 to 10. We gradually came to the topic, who comes to the tertiary education institution? And then it happened so, not working on the management topic and management of education, we faced with experimental schools, with pre-universitaries. There are several names, as far as I know, unpatented names of education institutions that equip children so they can be admitted to the tertiary institutions. We come to the theme of the schooling, pre-university education, and just 2 days from now we launch first program. The name of this program is Step in Development of School. This program for private schools, for the principals, for the leaders of private schools. And our interest is so that we, together with people who are directly involved with the schooling education, we can look at potential variants of development of such type of education institutions, advanced institutions that don't need support from the state. Going back to the question that you highlighted as part of the title of the session, the schools don't need state. And the state can, in certain sense, trust them and allow them to experiment in order to get new samples. It's impossible to say successful or not successful, but new examples of organization of the school education in general, and especially in the format of the pre-university. That's why we start such a program. We start such a program for schools that are in position to work without state, and they can give the state chance to focus at the objectives that have to do the 12 million people of which we spoke. Clarification question. Between the schools and mass school, from the standpoint of that you will elaborate in your curriculum, is there an unpenetrable wall? Is it possible to translate knowledge to the general schools? The answer is, I don't know. We don't have clarity, and this uncertainty element is good, it's not bad. We work with the marginal schools, in this case with the marginal school with the sign plus, and they may have experience that is irrelevant. For other schools, experience can be irrelevant to the similar ones in terms of financial support. And preferences of the schools and experience may be relevant for all schools, and it seems to me that all three cases that they have value. Thank you. Then continuing the topic, Even more so, since you talk about the schools that are standing out. You spoke about these 12 million students who are gifted, assessed not by Olympiads and other contests. The question is still this. We were speaking regarding the order, the goal of education. If the goal of children and parents don't correspond to the goal established by the state as the customer, while it's still customer, if they don't correspond, it's number one. What happens then? And the second, going back to this 12 million, sorry, this number is not absolute, it's not dogma. It's just for the example sake. You work with the schools located that are in difficult condition. The first client of translation of this experience as the best schools going through Skolkovo, and those schools that elaborated good results in the big cities such as Moscow. Is it possible, in your opinion, is it possible to translate this experience onto these schools so that we can equalize the goals and objectives? I'll let Isaac.
Thank you. Could you put on 2 slides, please? I'd like just to show you the slides for your references. First of all, it seems to me that, well, it's a disclaimer, as Andrei has already mentioned. Well, actually, I consider myself to be more conservative as compared to being an innovator. Maybe it comes with age, because it seems to me that, in fact, we have advanced the schools, well, but in general, we're talking about a gigantic system, well, tens of thousands of schools as far as ordinary education is concerned. And of course, we should not talk about the average temperature in the hospital using the metaphor. Well, we should not talk about bringing everything to something average. Well, of course, the best practice should be spread all over, including other schools, but it's impossible to do it. And there is one important reason why it's impossible, why we cannot spread the best practice all over. By the way, we're an ordinary school, and, well, we're a mass school, and there is a rating, 500 best schools. So when we first published the rating of 500 best schools, we told the organizers, guys, you have the wonderful rating system, but most of the schools are selective. So they select students for the schools. They said, no, they are just called the schools. Well, then I asked 5 people with master's degree to sign their children to the schools. They called the schools. They said, we know that your school is on the list of 500 best schools. We live not far from where you are. Do you have a competition? They said at the school, no, we don't have any competition, but we have an interview, and your child will be interviewed before he can enter the school. So I should say in this case that, of course, the foundation of the system is the schools that work with all children. These are just ordinary schools, and of course, such schools have ordinary teachers. We should help them. The major problem as far as selection is concerned boils down to 2 things: the motivation of a child and the motivation of parents. Now, I'd like to move on to your question. Should the state give the order, and we should achieve specific standards put forward by the government? Well, I should say that as a parent, I stand on the platform saying that I should give the order, not the government. And let me just explain what I mean. I put on this slide at different presentations, and this slide is about how requirements for skills on the labor market change. That's an American slide. Well, in 3 years ago, they used the same slide in Eastern Europe, and right now our Center for Labor Studies continues to collect the data for Russia, but just in a nutshell, well, routine types of labor, when you learned something and you can use the skills as repetitive skills, are fading into the background. Non-routine skills will become more widespread. Skills based on human communication, and so on and so forth. Public opinion, teachers, well, the pedagogical science cannot catch up with all these changes. What is happening now? So because of these changes, well, the point of view of what human capital is changing. And right now in education, we basically say that what is important is knowledge and cognitive skills, allowing us to do these routine procedures. But now we can see that there is a need of not just these repetitive skills, not just the need of those base knowledge, as Marina mentioned, but there is a need to have non-cognitive and social skills as well. I would not like to go into detail here, but we develop the new platform called Human Capital 2.0. In a changing world, there will be need of not just the social skills, not just the communication skills, but also the skill allowing anyone to make his or her own decisions. So this skill is of great importance. And look here, I would say that today the state has to translate these new requirements to the people. Well, so right now the government has to be a modernizer as far as the school is concerned. The government should be a step ahead, even exceeding the expectations of parents. Why am I absolutely confident about it? I'm sorry, I should advance the slides. Yes, that's the second slide. We conducted the study. What do parents and teachers think about these skills that we expect from our students? And here you can see the answers of students, of parents and teachers. What is the school responsible for? Less than 8% of parents and less than 15% of teachers believe that the school must teach students how to budget their time and also just to apply knowledge in practice. 1/4 of parents think that the school must teach students how to do it. Well, of course, I cannot criticize parents, but we must admit that many parents, many teachers as well, just make decisions on the basis of their own experience, but not on the basis of new requirements. And here, as paradoxically as it may seem, the state, the government must play a bigger role in education. The government should be a modernizer. It's a difficult role because they will sometimes run counter specific expectations, especially when we're talking about parents for whom the destiny of their children is one of the major values. So the state will have to start a dialogue with parents regarding what these students can expect in the future. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Well, in the process of the discussion, we have expressed several views on how the relations between the state and school must be built. On the one hand, it was mentioned that the government must refuse from being the main institution that issues orders. On the other hand, this Sarker has mentioned that the role of the government should increase because the government is responsible for modernization of the educational system. Well, in your view, speaking about the situation now, bringing to bear that together with other countries, we are living in a world that changes rapidly. Economies change, societies change, the relations between the government and school as the institution. Well, what should be the relations between the state and the school so that the school as an institution could work in a more effective manner? Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that those who planned this workshop and who decided to name this workshop like this wanted to make this discussion more drastic. Probably they meant something else. I think they wanted to discuss the educational policy issues related to general education, and of course this question is of great importance. This question is absolutely correct. As I was preparing for this meeting, I looked through founding documents, and just in order to understand how an ordinary person can get familiarized with the situation, what is, where the school is going, like, let's say, parents or a young family that wants to make plans for the future, depending on how many children they have, well, where their children can get their education, where they're going to work, whether their future work depend on the school education, and so on and so forth. So the situation is so that there is no such a conceptual document that could give answers to these questions. Unfortunately, as I was listening to you, you asked a question, is there a venue where we can discuss such issues? No, there is no such venue, and naturally this means that we should be very careful here. Well, naturally, as I listened to the discussion, I realized that no one mentioned that, in fact, there had been national priorities implemented in the educational system, especially in the general educational system. What does that mean? That the priorities do exist, but these priorities are not understood as priorities, at least at this stage. Why is it so? That's a different question. And actually, as for what you've shown on the slide, well, I should say that as a follow-up to the previous brief presentation, I would like to draw your attention to the following. I believe that this approach, well, when the employer tells the school what kind of employee they should get, what kind of knowledge their employees should get. That's the wrong approach, because here we'll be cornered here, because here the employer means that the employer just meets the demands of today, what the employee needs today. But colleagues, I'd like to tell you that the government adopted the concept of early assistance, which includes the educational component. And I'd like to remind you that the issues of education, the law on education, actually says that education can be provided when a child is 2 months old, when the baby is 2 months old. So let's just look at the situation in general when these babies become adults. So this will happen after so many years, and of course the requirements for today will be different after 20 years. And of course, the government must make predictions, must make forecasts of what the future is going to be on the basis of society's interests. And of course, the educational system, the school system must have specific conditions so that children who are at school now could find their own voice and could develop their skills so that they could meet the requirements of the future. That's what lifelong learning is all about. Maybe this child in the future won't be ready to work according to specific skills, especially in the field of artificial intelligence or robotics, but maybe this will be doctors who are totally different from today's doctors. These are people who will have new competencies. First and foremost, they will have the competency to learn. And the government must create such conditions for that. But there is also another aspect which is of great importance. Well, a lot has been said about it. Well, the government must provide the process of communication between society, not just parents and schools and the pedagogical community. If we bring down the process of communication to employers' requirements, in this case, and that's my opinion, we will violate the person's rights, the child's rights. Well, maybe this child in the future will be higher than his teacher. Well, in my practice, I realized that teachers who taught me, well, who taught my fellow students, well, they exceeded their teachers, and that should be the role of the government. We're also talking about with kids, about prodigy children, children with skills, selective schools as compared to ordinary schools. And of course, that's good when in magnet schools, well, there can be specific conditions created. But of course, as for talents, they change with time. And I think that you encountered such situation in your practice, but we live in a different society. We live in a society when there is a need to provide specific conditions for not just talented people, but also for students who do not have talents, do not have specific skills, but maybe they will become talented after the third year of study at the university, but they are not talented now. And there may be a different situation when there may be children who just have specific problems, who cannot just keep up with the current program, even the simplest kind of program. So the school must be more flexible. It should give more opportunities for every child so that every child could find his or her own voice. And that must be a different school as compared to what we have now. You're talking about different projects, and the project you've mentioned, is it about all these aspects, allowing children to find their own voice? Or maybe it's about just employers' requirements. So, in conclusion, I should say it's not a matter of state order, but the government must act as a mediator. Thank you so much. Well, can the government act as this mediator? Well, I think that the state is ready for this, is ready to act as a mediator, but at the same time, I should say that the state must respond to specific requirements. And of course, requirements should be taken into consideration, especially when we discuss such issues at such venues. Well, I do not know who is responsible for what in the presidium or in the audience, but I realize some of you are parents, some of you are grandmas and grandpas, and some of you are educators. So you ask yourself a question. You are the former Deputy Minister of Education. Well, and you can answer the question as the Deputy Minister of Education. Were you ready for this or not? Well, and we worked together for 3 years, right? Yes, and unfortunately, as for skilled children, well, please answer the question. Are you ready for this or not? We're ready. In fact, as for the national project that we are implementing in Russia right now, at least there was an attempt to do it, to provide more opportunities for prodigy children. I think that's a part of our project, and that's what we talked at the very beginning. We should work with children who have different skills and different talents. Well, I beg your pardon. Well, you know what? Let's take the Bolshoi Theater, and there is the ballet school under the Bolshoi Theater. And, of course, this ballet school train those kids who will become singers and performers at the Bolshoi, or will it train children for different music shows? Well, of course, we're talking about all talented children there, but their careers can be different. What is important is to create a condition so that the child can find his own voice. That's nice, but we should not just concentrate on this all the time, because if we'll be measuring our success or failure by the number of talented children, or if we measure our success or failure by the number of children who found their own voice, and in the future this will lead to more inequality among children, among high school graduates. I do not think it's good for society, because every family at this point, when they make a decision to give birth to a child, they want to invest everything in this child, and for each family a child is talented. So the goal of society is to help every child to find his own voice, and we must explain it to a child that even if he does a very simple thing, he or she has some specific skill or talent. If a child who has problems with health or has some disability, if he managed to do something, if he managed to achieve it, this child is also talented. Well, it's not a matter who is going to have specific skills and how they're going to work in the future using the skills or earn money using the skills, but for the government it is important to look at what kind of society we're going to have in the future, not only in terms of the level of the GDP, but in terms of values that this society is going to have, and where children can get those values. Of course, at school. Or maybe they do not get such values and morals at school. But for us, the most important value is man. Well, I don't like the term human capital. I don't like this term, but human capital is the most important one. Of course, the most important asset is man, and naturally the school has the most difficult task. When I heard something like give us money, give us subsidies, and I will figure out whom I should teach, well, that's an interesting stand, but anyway, you should be open to parents. You should tell parents, this is my program, this is my motto. Well, but I remember once there was a situation when there was a young teacher, and he came to me and he said, what did you come up with? Why do we need this inclusive school? Well, how are we going to work in this inclusive school? Well, but I asked the teacher, how long have you been working? What are you teaching? He said, I've been teaching history for 8 years. And he told me, you want me to teach history to disabled children? I told him, well, maybe you should learn more about the life of disabled people, disabled children. Maybe you won't have any problems. He said, I don't need to study. I know history quite well. Well, it's just an example. Well, the government in this case must correct this kind of teacher and tell him, well, yes, the school must be accessible for everyone, not just for talented people. Thank you very much, Alexandra. Well, from the point of view of a psychologist, from the point of view of academic science, well, you've heard different views on what the role of the government should be as far as general education is concerned. What is your view?
Provocative title of this session was declared. So the question, why does the school need state and why do we need hospital or army? Wonderful. For some issues, it's true. It's system-forming element without which any state does not exist. The other thing that the state should understand, there was whispering in this room. State is the state power. The state is also a territory with people, with society that live within the framework of the boundaries. And we can discuss this topic. In order to cut short my presentation, most important that was stated. The state needs school. What is the function of the state? The state now is the formal customer of school. It's financing a state order. On the other hand, seemingly other participants of this process are not specified. Where is the society and where is business? And today during business breakfast, the key question raised was the relation between business and school. Now, this question happened and just recently when we had fully state economy, when the fully state system of education, and then things started to change in economics faster than education. Maybe it's good that education is not changing so quickly. Healthy inertia must help to reflect all these changes. That is why the first interaction between education and business, we remember, we were taught that there's a labor market, and then business comes and takes those from the labor market, from the tertiary institutions, graduates. Then we started to learn that business is the key customer of all educational system. Seemingly, yes, they come to work, they need to know and be able, and they say, forget what you were learning in 5 years, and we'll teach you differently. Then there was offer of the standard system that must be developed together with business. Business knows what it needs, seemingly logical. On the other hand, is any employer capable of knowing what competences he needs in order to prepare a man by the educational system in 5 or 10 years? Otherwise, we come to a situation of short-term educational programs. It's seemingly clear, and in a few months or year and a half, we teach something oriented at the needs of an employer. How fast we should change our educational standards according to the current demands. Education to this educational system is supermarket. I take this, I don't take that, I need that, I don't need this. It's not quite right, or quite not right at all. And the function of the school, employer gradually through the labor market comes to the vacancy market, then comes specialization, there's corporate universities came about, and it's not from of not doing nothing, but because business feels necessity in this. That's why it's quite certain logics we can see. It's not tossed in the air money. The employer wants to come to the general education, so it's about the general school. Maybe it's about unsatisfaction of what's happening in the general school, and maybe it's this. I was a student at this school, I will be paying for the needs. Now I can give $500 million, the school will feel good, but 42 schools in the Russian Federation, the Ministry of Education would be glad that every school has endowment of $500 million. Then comes the question about the innovative schools. We can go back to the recent story. We remember the end of 80s, perestroika. The teachers, innovative teachers, this innovative teacher in this concrete school has created something that can be multiplied and spread across all the educational system, or it's simply very successful local experience for this given school. As they stated, you need to clone known last names and then it will work out. Do we need to clone these schools? Perhaps the answer is this. We need to take a look at what in these schools can be borrowed, if you can borrow something in terms of the system changes of all educational system. And it is necessary to have scientific expertise, because transition to the school is not possible without question who teaches at school. So a question to the teacher, requirement towards the teacher. We're talking about motivator, navigator, organizer, anything and everything. The content of education by default is clear. We know what must be taught in math, in chemistry, what the child should read in literature, and all the collegiate in the Ministry of Education considered the concept of the subject. All speakers said that we need to clarify the content of education, how to teach geography, how to teach society. And they said, no matter how we teach, motivation is low, the knowledge is low. We get good grades on the aptitude test, have nice KPI, and dynamics is nice, but in fact, the outcome is not good. So the key challenge of educational system, not the content, it can be clarified easily, but there are many specialists. We're ahead of all the planet. Question is new educational technologies. How much a teacher graduating from a teacher's institute can come and start this work to hold the attention of school children who 9 out of 10% are in gadgets and widgets. If it's not graduate of yesterday, pedagogical university, the gap between digital generation of school children and analog society of the teachers and grandmothers and grandfathers, this border is also effective. So now the question is what to teach. So we can establish invariant system, I can specify it as the base part should be. The question how to create motivation that system will be self-developing, how to teach, learn, just like French minister said today. The system of education of France decided to do it. Since last century, it was perfectly developed in the system of psychology and pedagogics. Going to the language of economics, we had A, the industry, and B, industry. Group A is production of the production tools. When we equip a teacher and can equip children, the teacher can equip children and teach how to learn self will be one of the most important competences. We add digital competences, they're important, and they will be practically in all professions, because now there is a stereotype. We need more IT people, we need more programmers, and economy will function. The digital economy will not function with programmers only, without IT competences within other professions, within basic school things. It will not become a driver of the entire economy. So the question how to implement into teachers' society. We need this perestroika and thinking. What is digital competence in my subject? We have informatics. We have technology, new concept developed. It's there. As for the other subjects, there is no such thing. So it's necessary to have transition and reflect it within the system of preparation of new teachers and how they will be called. The next electronic resources. We have Moscow Electronic School, for example, Russian Electronic School, recorded lessons. What happens? A teacher comes to lesson children, switch on the 25th episode from the 4th season of the biology class, and talking head with beautiful sujets. So the question, I make it roughly speaking, the role of teacher, somebody who comes to switches on monitor or switches on computer and then conducts test. Otherwise, we remember that the teacher is the subject of education process. School children are subjects. And oftentimes in this digital endeavor, we remember that between information and knowledge, there is a borderline. If we say that child is being drawn into information, and the question, what does he know or can find with the relevant search engine? When we say that knowledge is little and less knowledge is left, and the question where to find different information. And time is limited. I'm sorry. You raised very important aspect, transformation and preparation of the teachers, and most important is not that relation to the knowledge and attitude. Maybe it's doesn't change fast, but technology implemented in educational process are more important. And the last phrase I will declare. As for participation of the state in modernization, state and regulator, state and the customer, state and the financier. It is clear we need to do all these things, but we need to do it in such atmosphere when we have collaboration and trust setting. When the state comes with the school, I'll make another reform, but we know what feelings and the educational system have. That's why if the state acts, as Alexandra said, the mediator between school and school community, society, parents and business, then the function of the state will be more important rather than regulatory role. And organization of the collaboration or co-working will have more sensible results. The question of trust is the key question, not only in education, because there is no economics without trust. Since you talk about business breakfast, I'd like to make a remark. What did you eat? Colleagues, very little time is left. I'll make short remark regarding this topic. We talk about working with all children and business breakfast for business community and the part of the community that invests into education. They declare the order to have elite type of education. This is a separate interesting topic. Members of business, it's absolutely correct. It is clear that it's not simple problem. There are many problems within this problem of development of education. I have one question. Is there a place for business in schools, and what business, professional business, and the core business can help to resolve? Good afternoon. Please put the presentation of Russian textbook. I'd like to reflect on the wonderful presentations and proper words spoken. And I find myself in disarray because, honestly speaking, in the declaration made here, there's participation in the normative documents. It is accompanied by contradictory actions to the declaration. In particular, what we can talk about, everybody since federal educational standard in 2010, they speak about necessity to develop modern competences. At the same time, in the monitoring system, the quality of education is present. We have two indicators. Is aptitude tests after 9 and 11 years. During last times, the competences were not created and are not being applied. The president talks about necessity to elevate the quality of education, so the country can be in the top 10 of the countries of the world. Very quickly, Ministry of Education in December, with errors and mishaps, adopts the list of the textbooks that cuts it by 30%. Did you see situation anywhere when monopoly provides the quality of product? I'm an economist. I'm the candidate of economical sciences. I don't know any industry where monopoly stimulates development of quality. And we, de facto, in teaching materials, we have monopoly of one publishing house. And today, with the adoption of this list, this monopoly will strengthen. The share of this publishing house will come to 80 and maybe 90% of the total market share. The level of decisions made creates total disparity in our publishing house. From the federal list, the literature, Yefrosinina's textbook was crossed out, and she received the award of the president for the contribution in educational system. Sorry, it's diversion, it's emotional presentation, because it's back to the question that Andrei asked. It's very important. It was stated even in the morning today. Participation of business in schools life, what is it? Is it possible in general? I'll tell about what do we do specifically, what our publishing house does. We talk about that we work on not teaching materials. We work towards the improvement of quality of education. We have different tools. First is content. In the broad sense, it's teaching materials, it's methods, paper, digital, that enable realization of this or that course provided by the school program, by curriculum. Digital technologies and services, we create a lecture platform where every participant of the process can do this and that, educational operations easier, efficient. A teacher can carry out a lesson without preparation based on the well-established working program created in form of visual materials, text, pictures, audio, video, problem list. It comes up and starts working. If he needs to change something, there's opportunity. We realize the control services. We help to adopt the level of we research and sort out what should be educational environment of the school, how should it look, because contribution into educational system, into result and the quality, according to the assessment of some international scientists, is between 16 to 20%. We work on development of teachers. We create the further educational system for teachers. Last year we taught about 50,000 people, and the scale of this activity is on the rise. And finally, we do a very important fifth component that integrates in essence all the rest. It's management of schools. Schools are different. There are schools that are good and everyone wants to get there. Let's say Gifim Lazarevich school, and there are schools, let's say, regular. And research what is difference between good school and regular school. The teachers' staff is different. Where did it come from? The principal, the competency of the school principal, ability to assemble, teach, and tune the team that can take form of the result. Finally, if we talk about governance of educational in the regional level, together with High School of Economics, we developed wide-scale research on factors that really impact quality of education in the regions. And now we conduct pilot project in one of the provinces in terms of implementation of this mechanism that allows to build not just intuitive management system. So we change something and see what's happening, but the governance based on data that's realistic in terms of collaborative filters from the mathematical statistics that really impacts educational result given by educational system in the regions. The experience and our resources and opportunities allow us to resolve all the problems that was specified here, and the objective, of self-development and implementation and scaling and creation of innovative practices and digitalization of the education. Seems to me that in this situation, maybe there is a reason to have more detailed discussion how to divide authority of state and business. In my view, very important to properly draw a borderline. The words were spoken that the state should create conditions in order to the system develop, because the goals set by the state of the country that we see ourselves at the end of the day will be achieved. Thank you. One clarification question. You mentioned platform digitalization. Do you earn with school? It's a secondary for us. So you earn. Let's look at this like that. We have simple position. If for what we do, we are paid is the highest rating and assessment as the proper action. If we're not paid money, we oftentimes do projects for the future. We want to try and see what's happening and what will happen with the High School of Economics, with Russian Academy of Education, and with other participants. They directly don't impact monetization. 50,000 teachers educated last year, they didn't give us serious contribution to the income of a national outcome. But it's important for us because in this situation we understand that our teacher has opportunity with our instruments to work more efficiently and achieve better results, better self-realization, and it motivates so that at the end the teachers can work at school and create a foundation for our successful future. Alexandra Yurievna, I have a very short statement. Seems that moderation and formula such as school plus business happens to be unilateral from the standpoint of school preparing personnel for business. Partially, yes, but not only. Part of those who graduate from school, they are not related to business. They will not relate to business. They will work for the state, for municipal services. They will go to non-commercial organizations. They may become charity organizations. So the formulation is correct that business and school, if such discussion, if this discussion is underway, we should turn around. It's one of the, components, request from business. But this business, I'm sorry, is alive. And sorry, but something may happen tomorrow, but it forms the order for school. Does anybody check the stability of this business? How does this business feel? Does it manage its own economy? With Andrei Vladimirovich worked in one ministry. I replaced Vladimir Andreevich, and we passed several crises. So what if those who are not there anymore would determine state of school. Is this correct model? This model at least needs to be discussed, at least. Now, you asked, do you earn with school? As if there is something wrong about it. Nothing wrong about it. Business is business that earns some way within educational system. I'd like to tell you that, for instance, about me, they complain to me that most of the costs for families, not in school years of children, but at the preschool time. This preschool time, especially when children are prepared for school, if you're not informed, now children are prepared for school like used to be preparation for institute admission, for money, by the way, not only schools. Kindergartens, there are different forms. I simply say that whether it's good or bad, but people have different tastes, but the question is different. The state in this sense must define that this stage by the state includes or does not include, and if it includes for somebody and for some that have opportunity does not include, and nothing wrong about it. If the services are based on payment, most important to have this array, this alignment. The selective school has proprietary requirements, so we have, some corruption component. We don't need this. This is all I wanted to say. Obviously, in the moderation process, there was some unclearness. Business in discussion was used in two senses. As potential customer for the graduates. In this sense, it's not only businesses, subjects of economics. It can be employer. It can be conservatory. It can be Tchaikovsky Hall. It can be Lenin's Library. It can be municipality of Kaluga province. For this reason, I'm saying that I'm trying to clarify that we talk about the employer. The second incarnation of business is private investments in educational projects. There is no, didn't have correlation with the departure of business. Yefim, I'm sorry for arrogance. I take the floor for the second time. I'm the only school employee. The first, I'm listening to you and thinking. Recently started the sign-up process for the children who will come to school in this autumn. Cannot use the full language. I know that 6 years ago, 10 years ago, didn't know absolutely that these professions will be required and those professions will not be required. I'm the principal of this school. Out of 40,000 schools of Russia, we don't want prepared children to any business, to any industry. No need. Why? I want to remind you what's stated today. I forgot. Somebody from Finland, Minister of Education, remember during plenary, chairman of the parliament speaker said, better is education, people live longer. I'd like to remind you. That's why we want them to live longer. Today, families, the major value of their life, I mean, non-drinking families of Russia. And there are very few drinking families. Their children.
And, of course, each normal family would like their children to live better than their mothers and fathers. Do you agree with that? The government wants the same. So, in my view, that's where we coincide in our desires. When society and the family have the same goals, should the government regulate some specific functions here? And, well, Yes, because this regulatory function is important. The government must provide resources. The government must be responsible for achieving high levels of competencies by those who cannot embark on the new strategy of education. National projects are important catalysts, but they should be the strategy implemented by the government. What is the importance of these national projects? Despite different indicators, despite different standards, well, we do not know what the outcome might be because the outcome might be unpredictable. When we had the education project in 2008, in 2005, remember that? Well, there was some specific outcome. The school at that time was not any longer the school that could function on its own. And obviously, well, one cannot go hand in hand without the other. Of course, the government, the state, and the school must work together. Thank you so much. Well, just in a nutshell, first, my provocation was quite successful. We had a good discussion. When mass education came to Russia, it was quite clear. The goal was to teach students how to read, write, and count. Well, right now, the goals are different. And, of course, the school must train students for their long life so that they could be useful for society, regardless of whether this student is a cosmopolitan or not. So when we're talking about education, right now our goal is to make everything possible so that our high school graduates could participate in the international labor market. Well, and that's our goal. And naturally, of course, we have different goals today as compared to what we have in the 1920s. And, well, sometimes it can be some kind of schizophrenia when you do the same things, but the results are different. Now we realize that the goal is different as compared to what we had 100 years ago. We need to change something. And the second thing is that the government must set some particular standards. There should be the state standard. It's quite obvious. But at the same time, there should not be any deviations. Well, the standard is something that you should achieve. You cannot do worse. You can do better, but you cannot do worse. And right now, as for the state single state examination, well, you can see that a student should be trained to pass the single state examination. There are specific stereotypes, but you should go beyond the single state examination. And the question is that right now the government must expand the boundaries. Well, on the one hand, the state must provide constitutional guarantees such as the student must pass a single state examination, but obviously, well, we should go beyond that. And of course, what was described by Vygotsky, and that means reproductive type of thinking that is aimed at creation, at creativity, and there is a type of thinking that generates the knowledge. Well, and of course, we're talking about digitalization. That means that the government should be involved in this process. Such systems should be created only by the government, because here we're talking about personal data, the protection of personal data, and making decisions on the basis of this data. Digitalization will soon accumulate such an amount of information when we won't need such specific standards, because in this case we will see how 15 million students and their parents will be for the use of specific information, which you can find on the internet, not just in a particular textbooks. And of course, the question how fast you can find this knowledge, how fast you can find this information will determine your future. And basically, when you can see, for example, that 10,000 people liked what you did, as far as this service is concerned, you will use this particular kind of service. But when only 1 or 2 persons liked this kind of service, obviously you won't use this particular service. When we're talking about, say, hotels on Booking.com or somewhere else, so the degree of trust will be measured in absolute figures. What grades will be given by teachers, parents, and students themselves. Thank you. May I just say a few words? Just a clarifying question for you. Actually, 2 questions. First, how from point A we can get to point B where there is trust? And that's the first question. And the second question, what about the national education program? Is it about this or not? We developed the methodology for this project, so I can say that the national project is about this, but as for the methodology per se, maybe it doesn't allow you to realize how this can be done. And of course, there will be working groups formed as part of the national project. We're open for any discussion. Regional, federal experts can participate in this project, and we inform people about those platforms where we can work with everyone. So the national project is about this, how to move from point A to point B where there is trust. It's a kind of technical corridor, especially when we bring to bear that there are 42 high schools, and obviously we have more than 4,000 institutions of higher learning. Of course, we cannot just snap our fingers and using a magic wand move from A to B. So as for reaching the point B, we need at least 5 years, at least, and then 2 or 3 years to verify this data. But we will lose unless we make this step, because the degree of trust, the degree of requirements for justice is very high. When we meet with children, they tell us, why should I go to school? And then I come back, and then I have to be coached by private teachers. So why in school? Well, you just waste our time. Well, I'm citing my students, so that's true. So there is a technical corridor of reaching from point A to point B. Alexander, I'd like to ask a question to the Deputy Minister. Before I came here, I decided to familiarize myself with the national projects which are underway. And I should say that as for our today's discussion, I found out that there were several very important aspects in those national projects. First, as far as I remember, by 2021, new requirements should have been developed for educational standards and national curricula, and that's it. But right now we are in 2019, so it's quite possible that now there are people who are working on all these issues, and we're having a discussion on this, but maybe there are some kind of labs or whatever who are working on this. Are these people among us? Or not? And what are they working on? That's very important, because that should be the subject of professional discussion. That's the first thing. Second, and this question was partly raised here, Someone said businesses should develop the system of assessment of education, but as for the national educational project, it says here, if I remember it correct, by 2020 there should be a new system of assessing the quality of education developed. And it will be a new system of assessing the quality of education, but on top of that, this system will be introduced in every educational organization. So obviously, this discussion should cover all these aspects, and including the system of assessment of the quality of education. We try to do it, and to some extent this system has been created. The Russian educational agency is involved in this process, but I believe that this is a very important thing. And one more question. I don't know what particular corridor we walk along, but it is mentioned in the educational program that by 2020 we should get rid of 3 shifts in school. Students will just will go to school in 2 shifts, and the question is, what particular schools are ready for this? In what classes we can use this 2-shift school system? How are we going to combine it with the supplementary education? As for the national project supplementary education, it is considered to be one of the most important factors that is responsible for character building, especially when we're talking about the new kind of student. According to the national project, 20% of students won't become this new kind of students, because only 80% will be involved in this supplementary education. So what should we do with this kind of corridor? Alexander, this question is very broad. Let me just answer some of the questions. As for the new state standard, we are working on this. We have 1,700 responses and proposals from the pedagogical community, from 8 regions of Russia, federal regions of Russia. And of course, these proposals, these comments will be taken into account. They will be sent to the presidential administration. Of course, this work requires a lot of efforts, and at the same time, we are developing a new methodology. When we write down 2020, that does not mean that all these requirements will be formed by 2020, and we'll continue discussing this. And of course, as for each fields of specialization, as for each subjects, we won't be able to prepare everything for them. As for this 80%, obviously I would like all students could be involved in supplementary education. In this case, it will be 100%, but then we'll need to amend the constitution so that all our students could have access to supplementary education. It should be guaranteed by the constitution, but it is not guaranteed right now. That's why we have this figure of 80% only. We should take into account all the problems here, because here we're talking about services, not about just children. And usually children go in for sports after classes, and that's also part of the supplementary education. And my colleagues have already informed me that the time is up, our time is up, but I can come to you anytime and discuss all the aspects related to the national project, and pay attention to all your requests. Thank you for this very interesting meeting. Well, with your permission, we exceeded our time limit, but the topic was very interesting and the discussion was very heated, so we were given extra time. Nevertheless, we're about to wrap this up. As a moderator, and I tried to moderate this discussion, although there was no need to do it, my impression is that, of course, we need a permanent platform, a permanent venue for interaction between all the parties of this educational process. It should be a public venue so that we could discuss different topics to improve the educational process. And, well, it is quite obvious that we need some strategic documents. At least a law on strategic planning envisages to have such a document, such as the strategy for education development. And this document should be discussed in public, and it should be a serious discussion. Most importantly for me, besides the fact that I'm a moderator of this session, well, I'm also a member of the business community that makes money on the school system. For me, it is important that corporate interests that my company represents would coincide with public interest. When there is such a coincidence, when our interests are the same, public interest and, well, the civil society interest, if it is the same, in this case, we'll be able to achieve better results. Otherwise, we'll just get stuck here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maxim. Well, thank you for this interesting discussion. Thank you for these interesting debates. Since there is a need for a venue, the venue is here. And we can discuss the different aspects here. The Academy of National Economy can act as an organizer of any kind of discussion, especially as part of the Federal Institute for the Development of Education, which is part of the Academy of National Economy. And what Yefim Rachevsky has already mentioned about the unexpected effects of the national project on January 17th. I invite you to the White Hall on the 4th floor of this building, and there will be a discussion on the national education project, the one which will be about the outcomes and consequences for the system of education. Thank you so much.